At my father-in-law's birthday party, my husband's sister said I wouldn't make a difference if I vanished. The entire backyard went silent. 70 guests stood frozen with champagne flutes halfway to their lips, while Vanessa Fletcher smiled that razor-sharp smile she reserved for moments when she wanted to draw blood. She had just finished her toast to Raymond, her father, and somehow twisted it into a commentary about family legacy and people who truly mattered. Then her eyes landed on me, standing quietly near the dessert table, and she added with a laugh that cut like glass. Some people are so forgettable. They could disappear tomorrow and nobody would even notice the empty space. Keith's hand tightened around mine so hard I felt my wedding ring press into my finger. Vanessa took a delicate sip of her champagne, her diamond bracelet catching the string lights as she surveyed the crowd's uncomfortable reactions with obvious satisfaction. I watched her scan faces, feeding off the awkward tension she had created. My mother-in-law Judith made a small sound of distress. Raymond cleared his throat. Preston, my other brother-in-law, suddenly found his shoes fascinating. But I simply set down my plate, walked directly to the microphone Vanessa had just abandoned, and tapped it twice. Every head turned toward me. "Thank you for that toast, Vanessa," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You're absolutely right that some people leave more of an impact than others. I've been taking notes on impact for quite some time now." I smiled directly at her, watching confusion flicker across her perfectly made-up face. "I look forward to sharing my observations soon." Then I handed the microphone to Raymond, wished him a happy 62nd birthday, and walked back to Keith without another word. The whispers started immediately, but I barely heard them, because what nobody in that backyard knew, what Vanessa certainly didn't know as she stared at me with narrowed eyes, was that I had been documenting her secrets for 8 months, and I had just decided exactly when and how I would use them. The Fletcher family had never quite known what to make of me. When Keith brought me home 4 years ago, I was a medical transcriptionist who worked from home, dressed in comfortable clothes, and preferred reading to cocktail parties. Vanessa was the golden child, married to Dr. Trevor Hamilton, a prominent cardiovascular surgeon. She drove a Mercedes, belonged to 3 country clubs, and made sure everyone knew about her charity work and social connections. I was quiet, middle class, and according to Vanessa's whispered comments that she thought I couldn't hear, aggressively boring. Keith loved me anyway. He was the middle child, steady and kind, working as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm. He had none of Vanessa's flash or Preston's easy charm, but he was genuine in a way his siblings had never quite managed. His parents were polite to me, if somewhat distant. They had clearly hoped Keith would marry someone from their social circle, someone who would fit seamlessly into their world of business dinners and charity galas. Instead, he married a woman who transcribed medical reports in yoga pants and spent Friday nights at home with mystery novels. The first time Vanessa made a cutting remark about my lack of ambition, Keith defended me. The second time, I squeezed his hand and changed the subject. By the 10th time, I had learned to let her words slide off while I observed. And that was when I started noticing things. Small inconsistencies. The way Vanessa bragged about her husband's success but never mentioned him being home. How she name-dropped clients and cases with specific details that made Keith frown when we discussed them later. The expensive purchases she made while complaining about medical malpractice insurance costs. I have a photographic memory, something people often discover too late about me. Every conversation, every detail, every casual mention of names and dates and amounts, all of it files away in my mind with perfect clarity. It's why I'm exceptional at medical transcription, catching errors and inconsistencies that others miss. And over the past 8 months, I had been transcribing Vanessa's life with the same meticulous attention. It started small. At Easter dinner, Vanessa mentioned that Trevor had performed 3 emergency surgeries over the previous weekend, but I remembered Keith mentioning that Trevor had been at a medical conference in Boston that same weekend because Keith had covered some of Trevor's hospital board meeting, a tiny inconsistency that I filed away. Then at Preston's July barbecue, Vanessa casually mentioned a patient case with enough identifying details that Keith later told me it would violate HIPAA regulations if Trevor had actually discussed it with her. Another note in my mental file. By September, I had started writing things down. Not obviously, just small notes on my phone when I got home from family events. Dates that didn't align, names she dropped that she shouldn't know, financial details about the medical practice that seemed off when Keith explained how such businesses typically operated. I wasn't planning anything specific at first. I just noticed the pattern of how Vanessa used information as currency, how she wielded other people's secrets and stories to maintain her position as the family authority on everything. Then came the birthday party. Standing in the Fletcher family's beautifully landscaped backyard, surrounded by their friends and business associates, being publicly dismissed as irrelevant, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. Vanessa had spent years making sure I knew I didn't belong, that I was Keith's unfortunate choice, that I added nothing of value to their family legacy. And I had spent those same years being underestimated, invisible, collecting every careless word she had ever spoken. After my brief response at the microphone, Keith practically dragged me away from the party. "What was that?" he asked once we reached a quiet corner near the garden shed. His face was torn between concern and something that looked like pride. "Naomi, you never engage with Vanessa. Why now?" "Because I'm tired of being invisible," I said simply. It was the truth. Just not the complete truth. Keith pulled me into a hug, apologizing for his sister's cruelty. Over his shoulder, I could see Vanessa watching us from across the yard, her expression calculating. She wasn't used to anyone pushing back. She certainly wasn't used to me doing anything except fade into the background. The party continued, but the atmosphere had changed. People approached me differently, curious about the quiet daughter-in-law who had finally spoken up. Judith cornered me near the bar with an uncomfortable apology about Vanessa's behavior. "She doesn't mean to be cruel," Judith said, her voice pleading. "She just has very high standards." "I understand," I replied, because I did. Vanessa's standards included being the center of attention, the source of all important information, and the undisputed queen of the Fletcher family hierarchy. What Judith didn't understand was that I had been meeting a different standard, one that required patience, observation, and perfect memory. And I had just decided that my collection phase was complete. The week after the birthday party, Keith came home from work with tension radiating from every muscle. He dropped his briefcase by the door and went straight to pour himself a scotch, which he never did on weeknights. I looked up from my laptop where I had been transcribing a complex cardiology report. "Trevor's practice is being audited by the state medical board," he said without preamble. "Vanessa called me 3 times today, hysterical. She wants to know if our firm can recommend a lawyer who specializes in medical compliance issues." I kept my expression neutral while my mind raced. What kind of audit? She wouldn't say specifics, just kept talking about misunderstandings and paperwork issues. Keith drained half his glass, but the way she sounded, it's serious. She kept asking if audits become public record and how quickly they resolve. I closed my laptop and moved to sit beside him on the couch. "Did you give her a referral?" "Of course. She's still my sister." He rubbed his face tiredly. "God, Naomi, if Trevor loses his medical license, it'll destroy them financially. Their whole lifestyle depends on his practice income." What Keith didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had sent an anonymous tip to the state medical board 6 weeks ago. The tip had included specific dates, patient identifiers that Vanessa had casually mentioned at family gatherings, and documented instances of potential HIPAA violations. I had been careful, methodical, using a burner email account from a library computer. The tip alone wouldn't prove anything, but it would trigger an investigation into Trevor's practice record-keeping and confidentiality protocols. 3 days later, Vanessa showed up at our house unannounced. I was in my home office, but I could hear her voice carrying through the walls, high-pitched and desperate. "Keith, you work with numbers, financial investigations. Can they access bank records during a medical board audit? Can they cross-reference practice income against reported procedures?" I stepped into the hallway just in time to see Keith's troubled expression. "Vanessa, I'm not that kind of analyst. You need to ask Trevor's accountant these questions." "His accountant is useless," Vanessa snapped. Then she noticed me standing there. Her eyes narrowed slightly before she forced a smile. "Naomi, I didn't know you were home." "I work from home," I reminded her gently. "I'm always here." Something flickered across her face, an uneasiness that hadn't been there before the birthday party. "Right, of course." She turned back to Keith. "Look, I need you to call Dad. Trevor and I might need to borrow some money to get through this audit period, just temporarily, until everything settles down." After she left, Keith was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Something doesn't add up. If it's just a routine audit about paperwork, why would they need emergency money?" "Maybe it's not routine," I suggested softly. That night, I made a second anonymous submission. This one went to the IRS, detailing discrepancies I had noticed between Vanessa's spending patterns and what Trevor's practice income should reasonably support. I included dates of luxury purchases Vanessa had bragged about, mentioned in passing at family events, cross-referenced with public records of Trevor's practice revenue. Again, I was careful. Nothing directly traceable, just enough information to raise questions that would lead investigators to dig deeper. The following Sunday dinner at the Fletcher house was tense. Vanessa arrived late, her usual polish slightly cracked. Her makeup was perfect, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She kept checking her phone throughout the meal, barely touching her food. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Raymond asked her. "Fine. Just dealing with some administrative nonsense at Trevor's practice." She waved her hand dismissively, but I noticed it trembled slightly. Nothing that can't be resolved. Across the table, Preston was discussing a business deal with Raymond. Judith was trying to maintain cheerful conversation about an upcoming charity auction, and Keith was watching his sister with growing concern. But I was watching something else. I was watching Vanessa's mask slip, degree by careful degree. During dessert, Vanessa's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face went white. "Excuse me," she muttered, stepping out onto the patio. Through the glass doors, we could see her pacing, her free hand gesturing sharply as she argued with whoever was on the other end. "That's the third call she's taken during dinner," Judith said worriedly. "Raymond, do you think we should ask if they need help?" "I already offered," Raymond replied. She insisted everything was under control. Vanessa came back inside, her composure restored but her eyes harder. She looked directly at me, and for a moment, I saw calculation there. "Naomi, you transcribe medical reports, don't you? You must understand patient confidentiality protocols." "I do," I said evenly. "So you know how easy it is for misunderstandings to happen. A doctor mentions a case to his wife in general terms, just venting about his day, and suddenly it's treated like a violation." Her voice had an edge that made everyone at the table uncomfortable. "HIPAA is actually quite specific," I replied, keeping my tone conversational. "It's not about general venting. It's about sharing identifying patient information without consent. Dates, names, specific medical details that could identify someone." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Well, I'm sure Trevor never did anything like that. I'm sure the audit will clarify everything," I agreed pleasantly. The rest of dinner was strained. Keith kept shooting me confused glances, clearly picking up on the undercurrent between his sister and me. When we left, he waited until we were in the car before asking, "What was that about?" "What was what about?" "That exchange with Vanessa. You two never talked directly, and suddenly you're discussing HIPAA violations?" I shrugged. "She asked about my work." I answered honestly, but Keith knew me too well. "Naomi, what's going on?" I turned to look at him directly. "Your sister has spent 4 years making sure I know I don't matter, that I'm forgettable, invisible." I paused. Maybe I'm just tired of being invisible. Keith reached over and took my hand. "You were never invisible to me." "I know," I said softly, and I did know. Keith had always seen me, valued me, loved me exactly as I was, which was why what came next would hurt him, at least initially. But Vanessa had made her choice when she decided to humiliate me publicly, and I had made mine when I decided that being underestimated was the perfect weapon. 2 weeks later, the story broke in the local news. Dr. Trevor Hamilton was under investigation by both the state medical board and federal authorities for multiple violations, including patient confidentiality breaches, insurance fraud, and billing irregularities. The report cited anonymous tips that had led investigators to discover a pattern of misconduct spanning 3 years. Vanessa called Keith sobbing. Then she called again, angry, then desperate. Trevor's practice was being shut down pending the investigation. Their assets were frozen. The Mercedes was being repossessed. Everything was falling apart. And I sat at my desk, transcribing a routine physical exam report, my face calm and my conscience clear. Because Vanessa was right about one thing. Some people really do make a difference when they vanish. But she had been wrong about which one of us that was. The Fletcher family entered crisis mode. Raymond called an emergency family meeting at their house, which Keith and I attended on a rainy November evening. When we arrived, Vanessa was already there, sitting on the couch with tissues clutched in her hand. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had delivered that cutting toast a month ago. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her designer clothes replaced with jeans and a wrinkled sweater. "Thank God you're here," Judith said, ushering us inside. "We need to figure out how to help." Preston arrived moments later with his wife Deanna. Once everyone was seated, Raymond cleared his throat. "Trevor's legal fees are going to be substantial. The practice closure means no income. Vanessa needs support while they navigate this situation." "How much support?" Preston asked carefully. "Their mortgage alone is $8,000 a month," Vanessa said, her voice raw. "Plus legal fees, living expenses, Trevor's malpractice insurance premiums. We're looking at needing around $30,000 a month just to stay afloat. Keith's eyes widened. Vanessa, that's not sustainable. How long until the investigation concludes? The lawyers say it could take 6 months to a year. She dabbed at her eyes. Maybe longer if it goes to trial. Raymond looked at his children seriously. I'm proposing we pool family resources. I'll contribute $10,000 monthly. I'm asking you 3 to split the remaining $20,000. About $7,000 each per month. The room went silent. $7,000 a month was more than my entire monthly income. I watched Keith's face carefully, seeing him run calculations in his mind. We could afford it technically, but it would wipe out our savings within months and eliminate any financial cushion we had built. Dad, Preston said slowly, that's $84,000 from each of us over a year, $252,000 total from the 3 of us, plus your $120,000. We're talking about nearly $400,000. She's family, Raymond said firmly. Vanessa looked around the room, her gaze landing on each of them before settling on me. I know I haven't always been kind, she said, and I almost believed the tremor in her voice, especially to you, Naomi. I was awful at Dad's party. I'm sorry. She looked down at her hands. I was wrong. You're family too, and I should have treated you that way. Judith made a small, approving sound. Keith squeezed my hand. Everyone waited for my response. Apology accepted, I said quietly. Then I stood up. Would anyone like coffee? I can make a pot. That would be lovely, dear, Judith said, relief evident in her voice. I went to the kitchen, and within minutes, Vanessa followed me. She leaned against the counter, watching me measure coffee grounds. You meant what you said, right? About accepting my apology? Of course, I replied, not looking at her. Good. Because I really am sorry. She paused. Keith mentioned you transcribe medical reports. Have you ever seen cases like Trevor's, where there was just a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion? I poured water into the coffee maker before answering. In my experience, state medical board investigations are usually triggered by specific, documented evidence. They don't pursue cases without substantial basis. But mistakes happen, right? Someone could misinterpret something, report it wrongly. The medical board verifies tips before launching full investigations, I said, meeting her eyes for the first time. They would have confirmed violations before moving forward with charges. Something shifted in Vanessa's expression. You seem to know a lot about the process. I transcribe depositions sometimes. Legal medical cases. I smiled slightly. You pick up how these things work. She studied me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out if there was a threat hidden in my words or if I was just making conversation. Finally, she pushed off the counter. Well, I appreciate you and Keith helping us. I know $7,000 a month is a lot. We haven't agreed yet, I said mildly. Her eyes narrowed. Keith will agree. He always does what's right for family. Yes, I agreed. He does. After she left the kitchen, I stood there listening to the coffee maker gurgle, thinking about what was right for family. Keith would want to help his sister. He was generous and loyal. And despite Vanessa's years of cruelty toward me, he would see her current suffering and want to ease it. I knew him well enough to know he would agree to the $7,000, would sacrifice our financial security to support her through this crisis. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this crisis was only the beginning. When I returned to the living room with the coffee tray, Keith was already nodding. We'll do it, Dad. $7,000 a month. Whatever Vanessa needs. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Thank you so much. She looked at me. Both of you. I poured coffee and said nothing. That night, lying in bed, Keith turned to me. I know this wipes out our savings. I know it's not fair to ask this of you when Vanessa has been horrible to you for years. She apologized, I said. Still. He pulled me closer. You're being incredibly generous. She's your sister, I replied, and she's in trouble. Both statements were true. I didn't add that the trouble was entirely of her own making, amplified by my careful documentation and strategic timing. I didn't mention that every dollar we gave her would ultimately be wasted, because Trevor's case wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern of genuine misconduct that I had simply helped expose. Over the next month, our bank account drained steadily. $7,000 went to Vanessa on the 1st of December, another $7,000 on January 1st. Keith picked up extra project work at his firm to offset the loss. I continued transcribing reports, adding overtime hours where I could. We canceled our planned vacation. We stopped eating out. We watched our carefully built financial cushion evaporate. Meanwhile, Vanessa's situation worsened. The investigation expanded to include Trevor's business partner, who immediately hired his own lawyer and began cooperating with authorities. More violations were discovered. The news coverage intensified. Vanessa had to sell her Mercedes and lease a modest sedan. They listed their house but found no buyers willing to purchase a property that might be seized in asset forfeiture. At Christmas dinner, Vanessa looked haggard. The lawyers found more problems, she admitted to the family. Trevor's business partner was doing things Trevor didn't know about. But it all falls on Trevor anyway because his name is on the practice. That's terrible, Judith said sympathetically. How much more are the additional legal fees? Raymond asked. Another $15,000 just to defend against the expanded charges. Vanessa looked around the table. I hate asking for more. You've all been so generous. Preston shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa, we're already stretching to cover the $7,000 monthly. None of us have an extra $15,000 just lying around. I do, Raymond said quietly. I'll liquidate some stock investments. Dad, no, Vanessa protested, but there was hope in her eyes. You've done enough. You're my daughter, he said firmly. We'll get through this together. I watched this exchange while cutting my turkey into precise, even pieces. Raymond would liquidate stock at the worst possible time, taking a loss on investments he had held for years. He would do it because he loved his daughter and believed in supporting family through crisis. And that love, that loyalty, was exactly what Vanessa had always used to maintain her position at the center of family attention and resources. After dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom. On my way back, I paused outside Raymond's study, where I could hear Preston and Keith talking. Something feels off, Preston was saying. Trevor's business partner is cooperating with investigators. That suggests he has evidence that Trevor was actually involved in whatever they're being charged with. You think Trevor's guilty? Keith asked. I think the medical board doesn't freeze assets and shut down practices over paperwork misunderstandings, Preston replied. And I think Vanessa knows more than she's telling us. But she's family. We have to support her. Even if supporting her means bankrupting ourselves for something that might be legitimate criminal charges. There was a long silence. Then Keith said, What choice do we have? She's alone in this. Trevor's family won't help them. We're all she has. I continued back to the dining room, Preston's words echoing in my mind. He was right to be suspicious. Trevor was guilty of everything he was charged with and more. The investigation would prove it conclusively within a few months. And every dollar the Fletcher family poured into supporting Vanessa and Trevor was money that would ultimately be wasted defending the indefensible. But I wasn't ready to reveal that yet. I needed them all to invest more, care more, sacrifice more. Because when the truth came out, when Vanessa's world collapsed completely, I wanted her to understand that she had dragged her entire family down with her. Just like she had spent years trying to make me feel worthless and invisible, she would experience being the cause of real, measurable damage to people who loved her. On New Year's Eve, Keith and I stayed home while the rest of the Fletchers attended a party at Raymond and Judith's house. We couldn't afford a babysitter, Keith had joked, though we didn't have children. The truth was simpler. We couldn't afford anything extra. Our budget was stripped to essentials. $7,000 a month to Vanessa had reduced us to living paycheck to paycheck. As midnight approached, Keith raised a glass of cheap champagne. To better times ahead, he said. To truth coming to light, I countered, touching my glass to his. He smiled, thinking I meant truth about Trevor's innocence. But I was thinking about a different truth entirely. One that was already in motion, building toward an inevitable revelation that would shatter more than just Vanessa's carefully constructed life. It would fracture the entire Fletcher family's understanding of who they were and what they valued, and I would be there to watch it happen. February brought a cold snap that froze Portland solid. It also brought the first major break in Trevor's case. Keith came home from work one evening with his phone already pressed to his ear, listening to a voicemail from Preston. I watched him grow pale as he listened. Trevor's business partner made a deal with prosecutors, Keith said after hanging up. He's testifying against Trevor in exchange for reduced charges. The prosecutor is filing formal criminal charges, insurance fraud, patient privacy violations, falsifying medical records, and tax evasion. He sat down heavily. This isn't going away, Naomi. This is going to trial. What does that mean for Vanessa? I asked, though I already knew. It means legal fees we can't even estimate. It means Trevor could go to prison. It means Vanessa could lose everything. He looked at me with devastated eyes. We've given them $14,000 and it hasn't helped at all. Dad's given them $20,000 plus the $15,000 for additional lawyers. We're all bleeding money into a situation that just keeps getting worse. 2 days later, another family meeting. This time the atmosphere was different. Raymond looked older somehow, the strange showing in the lines around his eyes. Judith twisted her hands constantly. Preston arrived with spreadsheets, his expression grim. And Vanessa sat in the center of it all, her desperation now mixed with something harder, anger. Trevor's partner is lying, she announced to the room. He's fabricating evidence to save himself. Our lawyer says we can fight this, but we need money for investigators, expert witnesses, additional legal support. We're looking at needing another $100,000 minimum. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Vanessa, Preston said carefully, none of us have that kind of liquid capital. We've already committed to $7,000 a month each. Dad's given you additional funds. We're all stretching our finances to the breaking point. So that's it? Vanessa's voice rose. You're just going to let Trevor go to prison? Let our lives be destroyed? We're not letting anything happen, Raymond said firmly. But we have to be realistic about what we can provide. Maybe Trevor should consider a plea deal, Keith suggested quietly. If the evidence is this strong, fighting might only make things worse. Vanessa turned on him with fury. He didn't do anything wrong. He's being framed by his partner and a corrupt system. And you want him to just give up? I want him to be strategic, Keith countered. I want you both to face reality. The medical board doesn't shut down practices over nothing. Federal prosecutors don't file charges without solid evidence. Maybe Trevor made mistakes. Maybe he can get a better outcome by admitting some responsibility. How dare you? Vanessa breathed. She looked around at her family, her gaze landing on each of them before finally settling on me. This is your influence, isn't it? You've been turning my brother against me since that stupid birthday party. I met her eyes calmly. I haven't turned anyone against you. You stood up there and said you'd been taking notes, that you had observations to share. What did that mean, Naomi? What notes have you been taking about my family? The room went silent. Everyone was looking at me now. I meant that I'd observed how families work, I said evenly. How people treat each other. How cruelty becomes acceptable when it's dressed up as jokes or honesty. I paused. You said I wouldn't make a difference if I vanished. I was simply noting that impact works both ways. Is that a threat? Vanessa demanded. It's an observation, I replied. Keith put his hand on my knee, a silent plea to de-escalate. But Preston was watching me with sharp interest, his analytical mind clearly working through implications. Let's all calm down, Raymond said. We're family. We don't turn on each other, especially not during crisis. He looked at Vanessa. Sweetheart, I'll see what I can liquidate for additional legal funds. But you need to prepare for the possibility that Trevor might need to accept a plea arrangement. The evidence might be too strong to fight. After the meeting, Keith was quiet on the drive home. Finally, he said, Did you mean that? About taking notes on how my family treats you? Yes. Why didn't you ever tell me it bothered you that much? Would it have changed anything? I asked. You love your sister. You would have asked me to be patient, to understand she didn't mean it, to give her time. And I did all those things. I was patient for 4 years while she made sure I knew I was worthless. You're not worthless, Keith said fiercely. I know that now, I replied. But it took her complete devastation for anyone else to notice her cruelty. Keith pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine but didn't get out. There's something else going on here. Preston thinks so too. He cornered me after the meeting and asked if I thought someone might have reported Trevor to the medical board deliberately. My heart rate didn't change. Why would he think that? Because the initial tip that triggered the investigation was very specific. It included dates and patient cases that someone would only know if they had insider access or had heard details from Trevor or Vanessa. Keith turned to look at me directly. Naomi, did Vanessa ever mention patient cases around you? Specific details about Trevor's work? She mentioned things, I admitted, at family dinners, parties. She liked to show off how successful Trevor was, how important his cases were. What kind of things? Patient details, procedure specifics, sometimes names. I watched Keith's expression change as he processed this. I never thought much about it at the time. I just assumed Trevor had permission to discuss them. Jesus, Keith whispered. If Vanessa was repeating protected patient information at family gatherings, and someone reported it, he stopped. You transcribe medical reports. You would know what constitutes a HIPAA violation. Yes, I said simply. Did you report them? His voice was almost pleading. Naomi, please tell me you didn't report my sister to the medical board. I looked at my husband, this good man who loved his family despite their flaws, who had defended me while also asking me to be understanding of his sister's cruelty. If someone had information about genuine medical violations, they would have an ethical obligation to report it. Patient privacy matters more than family loyalty. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you, I said, opening the car door. Because whoever reported those violations did the right thing. They protected patients whose private medical information was being shared as dinner conversation entertainment. They stopped a doctor who was falsifying records and defrauding insurance companies. They held someone accountable who had been operating without consequences for years. Keith sat in the car for a long time after I went inside. When he finally came in, his face was drawn. I need to know the truth. Did you do this to my sister? Your sister did this to herself, I replied. I'm just someone who refused to be invisible anymore. He stared at me and I could see the moment he understood. The moment he realized that quiet, forgettable Naomi had been paying attention all along. That the medical transcriptionist who worked from home in yoga pants had perfect recall of every careless word Vanessa had ever spoken. That the woman his family had dismissed as aggressively boring had systematically documented his sister's violations and handed her over to the authorities. Oh my God, he whispered. You destroyed her. You deliberately destroyed her life. No, I corrected. She destroyed her own life by breaking laws and hurting people. I just made sure she faced consequences. There's a difference. We've been sending her $7,000 a month, money we desperately need, and you knew the whole time that she was guilty, that every dollar was wasted. Yes. Keith's hands were shaking. Why? Why would you do this? I know she was cruel to you, but this is beyond revenge. This is demolition. She said I wouldn't make a difference if I vanished, I said calmly. I wanted to show her what difference I actually make. I stepped closer to him. And I wanted her family, your family, to invest everything in supporting her, to sacrifice and struggle and bleed themselves dry, so that when the truth came out, when she was exposed as guilty of everything she's charged with, you would all understand exactly what you had lost trying to save someone who couldn't be saved. The color drained from Keith's face. That's sociopathic. That's justice, I countered. Your sister spent years making me feel worthless. Now she's cost your family nearly $100,000 and caused genuine hardship for people who love her. Now she knows what it feels like to be the cause of someone else's suffering. Keith grabbed his keys and walked out. I heard his car start, heard him drive away into the freezing February night. I wasn't worried he wouldn't come back. Keith was loyal to his core, but he needed time to process what I had done. Time to understand that the quiet woman he had married was capable of far more than anyone had suspected. I poured myself tea and returned to my laptop, where a half-finished transcription waited. As I typed, I thought about the final phase of my plan. Because Keith wasn't the only one who needed to understand what I was capable of. Vanessa needed to know exactly who had brought her world crashing down, and I had already decided exactly when and how I would tell her. Keith didn't come home that night. He texted around 11, staying at Preston's, need time to think. I replied with a simple, okay. The next morning, he still wasn't back. I went about my routine, transcribing reports, running errands, living my life as though nothing had changed, because in truth, nothing had changed for me. I had been planning this outcome for 8 months. Keith's horror at my methods was unfortunate but predictable. The call came on the third day. Raymond's voice was tight with suppressed emotion. Naomi, we need to talk. The whole family. Can you come to the house this evening? Of course, I said. Will Keith be there? He's here now. He's been staying with us. A pause. He told us what you said, about the medical board report. I'll be there at 6, I replied, and hung up before he could say more. I dressed carefully for the meeting. Not my usual comfortable home clothes, but a business-appropriate dress and blazer. I did my makeup and hair. I wanted to look every inch the competent professional they had all dismissed as boring and forgettable. When I arrived at the Fletcher house, every family member was present. They sat in the living room like a tribunal. Raymond and Judith on the sofa, Preston and Deanna in armchairs, Keith standing by the window, and Vanessa in the center, her eyes red but her jaw set with determination. Thank you for coming, Raymond said formally. Keith has shared some concerning allegations with us. Before we discuss them, I want to hear your side directly. Did you report Trevor to the medical board? Yes, I said clearly. Judith gasped. Vanessa made a sound like a wounded animal. Preston leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Why? Raymond demanded. What possible justification could you have for destroying your sister-in-law's life? Patient protection, I replied calmly. Vanessa repeatedly shared protected patient information at family gatherings, specific details about medical cases, including patient names, diagnoses, and procedures. Trevor was discussing confidential information with her, and she was using it as social currency. That's illegal. You could have talked to her first, Judith said, her voice shaking. You could have warned her to stop. You didn't have to report it. I'm not obligated to warn someone before reporting criminal activity, I said. And even if I had warned her, do you think she would have listened? Or would she have called me paranoid, boring, irrelevant? I looked at Vanessa. Like you've done for 4 years? This is about revenge, Vanessa spat. You vindictive, pathetic woman. I hurt your feelings, so you decided to ruin my entire life. No, I said. This is about consequences. You broke laws. Trevor broke laws. You both thought you were untouchable because you had money and status and family support. I simply proved you weren't. But the timing, Preston interjected, his analytical mind clearly working through the sequence. You reported them after the birthday party. After Vanessa's comment about you not mattering. Keith's right. This was revenge. The timing was strategic, I admitted. I had been documenting violations for months. The birthday party simply clarified that nothing would change unless I forced change. Vanessa would continue treating me as invisible. The family would continue enabling her. And patients would continue having their privacy violated. So yes, I chose that moment to act. You let us send her $14,000, Keith said from the window, his voice hollow. You let Dad liquidate stocks for $15,000 more. You watched us sacrifice and struggle, knowing the entire time it was pointless. It wasn't pointless, I corrected. It was essential. I needed you all to invest in supporting her, to feel the weight of that sacrifice. Because when the truth came out, when you realized she was genuinely guilty of everything she's charged with, you would finally understand what it costs to enable someone who refuses accountability. That's sick, Vanessa breathed. You're sick. I'm honest, I replied, which is more than you've ever been. I turned to address the entire room. Do you know what Vanessa said to me at Christmas when I was making coffee? She asked if I'd ever seen cases like Trevor's where misunderstandings got blown out of proportion. She was already trying to manipulate the narrative, to paint herself as a victim of the system. She knew Trevor was guilty. She's known all along. That's not true, Vanessa protested, but her eyes darted away. Isn't it? I pulled out my phone. Because I've been documenting more than just medical violations. I've been recording conversations. I played an audio clip. Vanessa's voice was clear. Trevor says as long as we don't put anything in writing, they can't prove he knew about the billing irregularities. It's just his partner's word against his. The date stamp showed it was from a family dinner in January. The room went silent. Preston's eyes narrowed. Raymond's face hardened. Keith turned from the window to stare at his sister. You've known he was guilty, Preston said slowly. This whole time, while we've been bankrupting ourselves to support you, you've known Trevor actually committed these crimes. It's not that simple, Vanessa started. It's exactly that simple, Preston snapped. You lied to us. You let us believe he was being falsely accused while you knew the truth. You manipulated us into funding a legal defense for genuinely criminal behavior. I'm your sister, Vanessa said desperately. You're supposed to support me. Support? Yes, Raymond said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Enable criminal behavior and deception? No, he looked at me. Do you have more recordings? 7 months worth, I confirmed. Conversations at family dinners, phone calls, private discussions, all legally recorded in Oregon, which is a one-party consent state. Vanessa has known about Trevor's guilt from the beginning. She's been using your love and loyalty to fund an unwinnable legal battle while planning how to hide assets if he's convicted. You were wearing a wire to family dinners? Judith asked, horrified. I used my phone, I said. Nobody pays attention to the quiet woman typing notes on her phone. You all assumed I was transcribing work or checking messages. I was documenting truth. Vanessa stood up, her face twisted with rage. You sanctimonious bitch! You think you're so superior, so righteous. You destroyed my life over a few comments at a birthday party. No, I said, standing to face her directly. I held you accountable for breaking laws that protect vulnerable people. for treating patient privacy as gossip, for manipulating your family into funding criminal defense. The birthday party just clarified that you would never face consequences unless someone forced them. Get out, Raymond said quietly, but he wasn't talking to me. He was looking at Vanessa. Get out of my house. Dad, Vanessa started. You lied to us. You manipulated us. You cost us nearly $100,000 for a lie. His voice broke. I liquidated retirement stock for you. Keith and Preston drained their savings, and you knew the entire time that Trevor was guilty of everything he's charged with. I'm your daughter, Vanessa pleaded. Right now, I'm not sure I know who my daughter is, Raymond replied. Leave. We'll discuss this later if there's anything left to discuss. Vanessa looked around the room, searching for support. She found none. Even Judith, who had always defended her, was staring at the floor. Finally, Vanessa grabbed her purse and walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence that followed was suffocating. Preston spoke first. The recordings. Will you turn them over to prosecutors? I already have, I said. Anonymous submission, but they have everything. Vanessa's admissions of knowledge, Trevor's acknowledgement of guilt, discussions of asset hiding. It's all documented. Keith finally moved from the window. He walked across the room, his face a mixture of anguish and something that might have been respect. You planned this entire thing, every step. The documentation, the timing, the recordings. You orchestrated the complete destruction of my sister's life. Your sister orchestrated her own destruction, I corrected. I just made sure it was thorough. Will you ever forgive me? He asked. For not seeing what she was doing to you, for asking you to be patient while she made you feel worthless. There's nothing to forgive, I said honestly. You loved your sister and wanted to believe the best of her. That's who you are. But she took advantage of that love. She weaponized your loyalty, and she needed to face consequences. Raymond cleared his throat. I need time to process all of this. But Naomi, I owe you an apology. I didn't protect you from Vanessa's cruelty. I enabled it by treating her behavior as acceptable sibling rivalry. Apology accepted, I said. Over the next week, the Fletcher family fractured. Raymond and Judith stopped taking Vanessa's calls. Preston contacted prosecutors to understand if any of the money they had given her could be recovered. Keith moved back home, though he was quiet and withdrawn, processing the revelation that his wife was capable of such calculated revenge. Trevor's trial date was set for April. His attorney advised him to take a plea deal. With the prosecution's new evidence, including recorded admissions from Vanessa, there was no realistic chance of acquittal. Trevor would serve 3 to 5 years in federal prison for fraud and HIPAA violations. Vanessa's life collapsed completely. She had to declare bankruptcy. The house was foreclosed. She moved into a small apartment in a rundown part of town and took a job at a retail store. Her social circle vanished overnight. The woman who had been the golden child, the center of family attention, the one who made sure everyone knew I was invisible and irrelevant, was now genuinely alone, and I watched it all happen with perfect clarity, knowing that every consequence was directly traceable to her own choices. I had simply refused to stay silent. I had simply demanded accountability, and in doing so, I had proven that being underestimated was the greatest advantage anyone could give me. April brought spring rain and Trevor's sentencing hearing. He accepted a plea deal. 4 years in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, complete loss of medical license, and restitution payments totaling $600,000. Vanessa sat in the courtroom gallery, alone. No Fletcher family members attended. They had drawn a hard boundary, and she was on the other side of it. I didn't attend either. I had no interest in watching Trevor face consequences. My target had always been Vanessa, and her punishment was far more comprehensive than any prison sentence. She had lost everything. Her marriage effectively over with Trevor incarcerated, her financial security destroyed by bankruptcy, her social status obliterated, and most painfully, her family's support and respect permanently withdrawn. 6 months after that February confrontation, I sat in my home office transcribing a routine medical report when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Naomi, it's Vanessa. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, stripped of all arrogance and polish. Please don't hang up. I just need 5 minutes. I muted my transcription software. I'm listening. I wanted you to know that I understand now. What I did to you. How I made you feel. She took a shaky breath. I spent years treating you like you were nothing, like you didn't matter. I was cruel because I could be, because nobody stopped me. And you took that pain and turned it into something that completely dismantled my life. Yes, I said simply. I'm working retail now. Minimum wage. I can barely afford my apartment. Trevor's in prison. My parents won't speak to me. My brothers have cut me off completely. Her voice cracked. Everything is gone, and the worst part is, I know I deserve it. I know I did this to myself. That's true, I agreed. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I'll never have that. I just wanted you to know that you won. You proved that you mattered, that you could make a difference, that people who underestimate you do so at their own risk. She paused. And I wanted to say that I'm sorry, genuinely sorry for every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every time I made you feel invisible. You deserved better. I leaned back in my chair, considering my response. Part of me, a very small part, felt something that might have been pity. But the larger part, the part that had endured 4 years of systematic belittling, felt only cold satisfaction. Apology noted, I said. Is there anything else? No, she whispered. That's all. I hung up without saying goodbye. There was nothing more to say. Vanessa had finally learned the lesson I'd been teaching since that October birthday party. That quiet people are not weak people, that being underestimated is a weapon, and that consequences always find those who believe themselves immune. Keith and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. It took months of difficult conversations, therapy sessions, and genuine reckoning with what I had done and why. He struggled with loving both his sister and his wife, with understanding that justice and revenge could look identical depending on perspective. But eventually, he came to accept that I had been protecting myself the only way available to someone dismissed as irrelevant. He understood that sometimes the only power the powerless have is perfect documentation and strategic timing. Our financial situation improved once we stopped bleeding $7,000 monthly to Vanessa's lost cause. We rebuilt our savings. We took the vacation we had canceled. We started planning for a future that didn't include being drained by his sister's manufactured crises. The Fletcher family dynamics shifted permanently. Raymond and Judith maintained their boundary with Vanessa, offering no financial support and minimal contact. Preston developed a healthy skepticism about accepting family narratives at face value, and Keith learned to see his wife clearly, understanding that quiet strength can be more dangerous than obvious power. As for me, I continued transcribing medical reports, working from home in comfortable clothes, living a life that looked exactly as it had before, but I was no longer invisible. The Fletcher family now understood that Naomi Fletcher noticed everything, forgot nothing, and had no tolerance for cruelty disguised as honesty. A year after that birthday party, Raymond called to invite Keith and me to his 63rd birthday celebration. Small gathering, he said. Just immediate family and close friends. No drama, I promise. We attended. The party was indeed small, held in their backyard on a mild October evening. Vanessa was not invited. As I stood near the dessert table, holding a champagne flute, Judith approached me. I never apologized properly, she said quietly. For not stopping Vanessa's behavior toward you, for enabling her cruelty because it was easier than confronting her. You're apologizing now, I replied. I want you to know that you belong in this family. You always did. She squeezed my hand, and I'm grateful that you refused to be invisible, even though the cost was devastating. Raymond made a toast to family, to loyalty properly placed, and to the importance of treating every person with respect. He didn't mention Vanessa's absence, but everyone felt it. The empty space where the golden child had once held court, demanding attention and admiration, was now filled with awkward awareness of how completely she had fallen. Keith found me later, as the party was winding down. Last year, you stood at that microphone and said you had observations to share. You terrified me when you said that. I had no idea what you meant. And now you do, I said. Now I do. He agreed. He pulled me close. I love you, Naomi. The real you. The one who's capable of both perfect patience and devastating revenge. I just hope I never give you reason to turn that attention on me. I smiled against his shoulder. You won't. You see me. You always have. That's the difference. As we drove home that night, I thought about Vanessa's phone call, her admission of understanding. She had finally grasped what I had been showing her all along, that dismissing someone as forgettable doesn't make them powerless. It just makes them underestimated. And underestimated people, given time and motivation, can destroy entire worlds with nothing more than perfect memory and strategic patience. Vanessa had said I wouldn't make a difference if I vanished. She had been catastrophically wrong. I made all the difference. I just made it quietly, carefully, and with consequences she never saw coming until they had already consumed everything she valued. The Fletcher family had learned a brutal lesson about the cost of cruelty, and I had proven, beyond any doubt, that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one nobody bothers to notice.